Good morning and welcome to this public session of the 7th India-Japan Indo-Pacific Forum, 10th India-Japan Track 1.5 Dialogue. I'm Hemant Singh, Director General of the Delhi Policy Group, and I would like to welcome our distinguished panelists and participants to this public session. I would like to start by just briefly mentioning that in our closed-door sessions held yesterday, we have sought to enhance understanding of the respective geostrategic positioning of India and Japan at a time of disruptions, conflicts, and transitions in the global order. We have reviewed India-Japan convergences and contributions, as well as the role of the Quad in bolstering Indo-Pacific stability, security, and prosperity. And we have examined ways to accelerate bilateral relations across the realms of economic security, technological exchange, and people-to-people relations. The outcomes of these discussions will be publicly available shortly in a DPG-JIIA joint statement posted on our website. Before we come to this panel discussion and before I introduce the very distinguished panel of speakers which we have with us, let us begin with the keynote virtual addresses of His Excellency Dr. S. Jaishankar, Minister of External Affairs of India, and His Excellency Mr. Iwaya Takeshi, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Japan. Let us see the...
Dear participants, I am glad to address the 7th India-Japan Indo-Pacific Forum. My compliments to the Delhi Policy Group and the Japan Institute of International Affairs for their commitment to this dialogue. Friends, the India-Japan Special Strategic and Global Partnership serves the cause of regional peace, international stability, and global prosperity. It is a bilateral relationship of great trust and growing substance. But precisely because we have come so far in the last decade, it is important that we develop ambitious targets and work towards realizing them. Our convergences are built on the alignment between India's Act East policy, our Indo-Pacific vision of Sagar, and Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific vision, as well as our shared support for the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. We also work together on the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, where Japan is to co-lead the maritime trade, transport, and connectivity pillar. As we expand common interests and forge new modes of collaboration, our strategic partnership will progress accordingly. Bilaterally, the Industrial Competitiveness Partnership, the Clean Energy Partnership, and the Semiconductor Supply Chain Partnership all reflect the contemporary agenda. The goal is to promote reliable and resilient supply chains, trusted digital collaborations, and secure green growth. I am confident that we will continue to think bold and act decisively to take it forward in an impactful way. Japan remains a key contributor to India's economic development as we strive to realize the target of 5 trillion yen investment by 2027. However, trade figures remain below expectations. In a world under flux, we must deliberate on the urgent need to enhance the quality of our economic cooperation. Friends, we have also seen greater frequency of defense exchanges and exercises, some breaking new ground. Moving to the next level, including through defense equipment and technology cooperation, is the task that awaits us. We are both members of the Quad, and the interactive dynamic between the larger environment and the bilateral relationship is a beneficial one. The enormous goodwill between our societies is yet to translate into intensive people-to-people connect. There is surely room to grow exchanges in education and tourism, or indeed in the movement of skilled workers. Recent initiatives from the Japanese side hold great promise, and we look forward to realizing them concretely in the near future. Today's dialogue, friends, provides an opportunity for an objective stock-taking and a practical strategizing on how to achieve the potential of our ties. I hope that the participants use it to best effect. I thank you for your attention.
ナマスカール。おはようございます。外務大臣の岩谷武です。日本政府を代表して第7回日印インド太平洋フォーラムの開催をお祝い申し上げます。本フォーラムは2016年以来、トラック 1.5 外交の一環として重要な役割を果たしてきました。今回のテーマであるインドと日本、アジアの安定と進歩のためのパートナーは、国際社会が厳しい安全保障環境に直面する中、大変時宜を得たものです。既存の国際秩序がさまざまな挑戦にさらされている今、自由で開かれたインド太平洋の実現に向けた取り組みがますます重要になってきています。そして法の支配や民主主義などの基本的価値と戦略的利益を共有する日本とインドは、インド太平洋地域の平和と安定に大きな責任を負っています。両国は近年、さまざまな分野で協力を強化し、二国間関係を飛躍的に発展させてきました。安全保障分野では、昨年初めて戦闘機の共同訓練や統合幕僚協議を実施し、インド太平洋における戦略や今後の日印防衛協力の可能性を共有しました。本年8月には3回目となる日印 2+2 を開催し、日印安全保障協力に関する共同宣言を改定することを決定しました。また、重層的な共同訓練の実施や防衛装備、技術協力といった安全保障分野での一層の連携を確認しました。経済面では、2022年に掲げた今後5年間における対印官民投融資5兆円目標の達成に向けて着実に進展が見られます。また、現地の日本企業がインドを拠点として将来の成長が期待できるアフリカなどの第三国への輸出にも取り組んでいます。こうした日本企業の活動を日本政府としても支援することで、Make in India, Make for World に貢献し、両国のみならず世界の成長と繁栄に向けて協働していきたいと思います。本年は特別戦略的グローバルパートナーシップ10年目となる節目の年です。今後も日本政府として安全保障分野はもとより経済、人的交流など幅広い分野においてインドとの関係を強化していく考えです。また、日印米豪をはじめとする同志国による連携も一層発展させていきます。最後に、本日の皆様による議論を通して、日印のさらなる連携の可能性が広がることを心から期待しています。ダニアワード、ご清聴ありがとうございました。
We thank the ministers for their messages and deliberations at this forum have been well aligned with the vision which they have shared with us, and we will now proceed to the panel discussion where our distinguished panel experts will share before the wider national and regional audiences perspectives on the rise of Asia in the Indo-Pacific and the Indo-Pacific in the global order, as well as the outlook for greater strategic coordination between India and Japan. We have with us a very distinguished panel of speakers. On the Indian side, we have Ambassador Kamal Sibal, Chancellor Jawaharlal Nehru University and former Foreign Secretary. Ambassador Nalin Suri, Distinguished Fellow for Diplomacy, Delhi Policy Group. Vice Admiral Anil Chopra, Distinguished Fellow, Delhi Policy Group. And on the Japanese side, we have Professor Endo Ken, Chair and Professor of International Politics, Faculty of Law, University of Tokyo. Mr. Kogakai, Head of Division of and Associate Professor in the Public Policy and Global Affairs Program, School of Social Sciences, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore, and Dr. Keota Tomoko, Associate Professor at the Research Center for Global Risk and the Office of Global Relations, Nagasaki University. I would like to request the speakers to keep their opening remarks brief to about 5 minutes each, so that we can have ample time for an interactive discussion and also open up for questions from participants. Let me now turn to the co-moderator, my colleague Ambassador Kenichiro Sasai, President of the JIIA. Ken, would you like to make some opening remarks before we begin?
Well, thank you, our Ambassador Hemant Singh. Let me start by thanking DPJ and Indian government for a kind, welcome to us, and this is taking place in especially in difficult ages ahead. And as the both ministers expressed, that the situation around us is not an easy one. As we all know that the wars going on in Ukraine and Middle East, we don't find any exit yet. And also in the Pacific, I mean, we see and predict some of the turbulent years around the Sino-American relationship. While China is rising, U.S. is undergoing with some of the domestic changes, and also how that will be making impact is enormous interest and even concern and expectations. And under this situation, I think the role and responsibility of India and Japan is very much increasing, and our strategic partnership has advanced over the years. But these two great democracies and the high, big economic powers have more rooms to do for the sake of the regional peace and stability and beyond it. And of course, there is some difference of the perspective, but that would be the purpose of having this forum, so that we could widen the room for more strategic partnership to be developing. And I think we could widen, deepen, and operationalize this global partnership more strategic way. So for that, I'm very much looking forward to active discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ken, for your remarks. And we can now proceed to the panelists. The first speaker will be Ambassador Kamal Sibal. Ambassador.
Well, thank you very much, Hemant. You said you have given me 5 minutes, but I think I'll take 7 or 8 minutes with your kind permission. I've always had a problem with the phrase global order, because it should normally mean peace and security and an authority to maintain peace and security. Unfortunately, the UN, which theoretically has that role and authority, has not been able to fulfill its core function. So whatever the order, in inverted comma, that exists is the product of US and European power. Asia has had little or no role in its establishment, as when its framework was established, Asia was largely colonized still. Japan had been defeated and had not risen, and South Korea was a poor developing country. This order, in inverted commas, over the years has been preserved through military domination, economic strength, control over the global financial system, military interventions, regime change policies, imposition of Western values, and an interventionist discourse on human rights and democracy, etc. The short point is that global order is not a neutral concept. It is embedded in Western hegemony. Juxtaposing the rise of Asia and global order implies a challenge to the West established order, and therefore is seen as disruptive. Actually, the political rise of Asia began with the decolonization. In fact, the notion of multipolarity was inherent in the convening of the Afro-Asian Conference and the Bandung Conference, and later with the non-aligned movement, which did not conceptually and practically accept Western unipolarity or bipolarity. In the group of 77 plus China and other such bodies fighting for the rights of the developing country was part of this assertion of developing countries in the international system. If now there is talk of rise of Asia, it is in the context of its economic rise, which has resulted in a shift in global economic power. But the economic rise of Asia is not a new phenomenon either. Japan rose a long time ago. South Korea has risen too. So has ASEAN. China's rise is an established fact, and India is now rising. Why is the issue of the rise of Asia and its connection with the global order being discussed today? The rise of Japan and South Korea and even ASEAN was actually seen as a consolidation of the global order, as these countries were allies of the United States and therefore was not seen as disruptive. Though, mind you, Japan's phenomenal economic revival was seen as a challenge to that order in some senses, and this was addressed through the Plaza Accords. These countries were seen as additional stakeholders in the existing West-dominated system. It is China's rise that has raised questions about its impact on the West-created and dominated world order. China is now the biggest manufacturing power. 30% of global manufacturing is in China today and may rise to 40%, as they say. It's the second largest economy and the biggest exporting country. It is also developing its military power and possesses the world's largest navy, besides expanding its nuclear and missile arsenals. It is carving out its own sphere of influence through military means in the Western Pacific and through its economic power across the continents. However, Japan and South Korea have massive economic ties with China, as also does the ASEAN, and this includes Vietnam too. These countries cannot disentangle themselves from China, as their economies would suffer hugely. Japan joining the RCEP shows how important China is economically for Japan. The strategy of rising Asia is to deter China, not to enter into a conflict with it. This gives China a lot of space to pursue its present slicing strategy of aggrandizement without provoking a real conflict. It is using threats backed by rising military power actually to deter others. For rising Asia, the US and the EU cannot substitute for China, nor can the ASEAN. The US is in any case becoming more protectionist, and the EU is protectionist in trade in many ways. Asia, on the other hand, with its large population, has huge market and developmental potential. India's rise is more recent, but India too has very substantial ties with China. The rise of Asia is not a collective peaceful rise. Many conflicts exist in rising or risen Asia, those between China and Japan, to some extent between China and South Korea, and of course China and South Korea, as well as Japan and South Korea to some extent, and of course China and India. The concept of the Indo-Pacific and its translation into cooperative mechanisms is essentially centered around the China challenge. There is no logical need to link the security of the Indian and Pacific Oceans if China were not a threat and did not need to be deterred. Japan, South Korea, ASEAN together, India do not threaten the Indo-Pacific space. China does. With its policies in the South and East China Seas, threats to Taiwan, territorial disputes with India, its maritime strategy in the Indian Ocean that includes strategic connectivity through Pakistan and Myanmar to the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal, its strategy of building and controlling ports and establishing bases. The irony is that rising Asia cannot by itself maintain order in Asia. It needs the US as a key partner, as only the US has the military power to deter China. The US has bases, military deployments, and alliances in the region. For Japan, the US nuclear umbrella is vital for its security. Japan has also to contend with the regional threat from North Korea. India too is strengthening its ties, defense ties with the United States. It's acquiring platforms and weaponry from the US with the China challenge in view also. It has signed all the foundational defense agreements with the US. It is ready to do burden sharing in the Indo-Pacific region by protecting the sea lanes of communication in the Indian Ocean, which are vital for Japan, also for its energy needs and trade. India's navy is the strongest local navy in the Indian Ocean. It has conducted Malabar exercises with the US since the 1990s. Japan and Australia have joined much later. India's role in the Indo-Pacific strategy is much wider in scope than that of the Quad, because India is also cooperating with, for instance, France in this area, in particular in the Western Indian Ocean, to monitor the Chinese presence there. The concept of free and open Indo-Pacific essentially applies to the Western Pacific, where Chinese maritime claims, the so-called 9-dash line, seeks to convert these waters into a Beijing lake, as Abe put it. It does not apply to the Indian Ocean, as there are no conflicting maritime claims in this region. If at all, the situation is the reverse, because Chinese movements in the Indian Ocean can be constrained by the choke points like the Malacca Straits, etc., and the Indian Navy. The outlook for India's strategic cooperation with Japan in the Indo-Pacific continues to be positive. The China threat will become increasingly potent as China makes strides in advanced military technologies. However, both countries should have a common understanding of the China threat and the means to counter it. Japan is highly dependent on the US for its security. The strengthening of the strategic ties between China and Russia makes Japan even more dependent on the US. Japan is part of the first island chain that China seeks to breach. Japan rightly considers China's threats to take over Taiwan as a threat to Japan's security. India is not an ally of the United States and is not dependent on the US for its security. It has stood up to China in the Himalayas. China senses its vulnerability to Indian naval power in the Indian Ocean, as it has for the moment no bases there that can sustain its long-term naval presence in the region. India, unlike Japan, is not hampered in its defense policies and assuming responsibilities by any constitutional provision. Because of its vulnerability to China and now also the Russian threat, Japan is supporting the presence of NATO in the Indo-Pacific region to the point of linking the Quad to NATO. India would have serious reservations about such NATO linkages. As it is, India initially had some reticence about Quad, as the other three members were military allies, and India did not want to give the impression of having joined a military alliance. The Americans have stated repeatedly that Quad is not a military alliance, both in deference to India's sensitivities, as also their own reluctance to establish a military alliance with India, as that would involve them in India's territorial disputes with China. Some progress is being made in defense ties between Japan and India. The Deputy National Security Advisor outlined these areas, and this is very promising. And if Japan can begin to share defense technologies with India in areas in which they have strength, this could actually strengthen our joint efforts for security and peace in the Indo-Pacific. One hopes that the constitutional and political inhibitions will not stand in the way of this. Ukraine has become, unfortunately, an issue of strategic difference between India and Japan. The Japanese leaders have joined their voices to that of the West in pressing us also on our position on Russian military intervention in Ukraine. And there are reports that Japan has sanctioned an Indian company for violating US sanctions on Ukraine, which, if these reports are true, would not seem to be compatible with the objective of forging stronger strategic ties. And these ties, as was again mentioned, should involve strategic coordination in the development of new and critical emerging technologies. A stronger India is a bulwark against China. If China has to increasingly face a two-front situation, it strengthens our collective overall deterrence against China. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sybil, for your opening remarks and addressing the overall issues of the rise of Asia and the Indo-Pacific, as well as outlook for India and Japan to be cooperative partners. Our next speaker is Professor Endo Ken. Professor Ken.
Thank you very much indeed, and thanks very much also the organizers of this conference of the Delhi Policy Group and Japan Institute of International Affairs, especially Ambassador Sin and Ambassador Sasai. I feel very honored to take part in this event with distinguished speakers. Now, the title is The Rise of Asia and the Indo-Pacific in Global Order. I feel that this is a sort of remarkable to see the spectacular rise of India. You're young, dynamic, growing. I'm far from sure if I can see Japan in the same manner, aged, stagnated, and formally developed. But as a whole, perhaps Asia in its entirety is on the rise, taken together with China, Indonesia, and other emergent economies. And as previous speaker said, looking back, Japan also led the rise of Asia from the 1960s on, followed by a number of newly industrialized countries, and then the ASEAN and the China and India. This is a sort of welcome sequence. Everybody has a right to be rich, developed, and respected. But the title includes global order. So what does it mean in its entire context of global order or forthcoming global disorder? In a nutshell, I wish to convey the message that the Japan and India needs to shoulder the responsibility to maintain or rebuild the world order. Development carries responsibility. If nobody takes responsibility, world order easily concedes into the world disorder. We must not allow ourselves to be just a bystander, but to shoulder. Now, there is no need to emphasize that the current world situation is in sort of the sort of problematic and disruptive. Everybody knows the United States enters into an era of political turmoil, if not the civil war. Two wars goes on with signs of escalation. China remains, problematic and revisionistic. The global South countries are indeed on the rise, pursuing their national interests in their own way. The West will be in disarray, if not dismantled. The resulting order points to a world of conflictual polycentrism, consisted of salient powers with little appetite for cooperation. And this posture clearly put an end to the post-war US-led West-centric global order with no room for normative structuration. If I may, I would like to go back to the history of global governance. And here I know that there is a sense of antipathy toward empires, especially the UK as colonizers and the United States in the 20th centuries and on, from 20th centuries on. And it is certainly justifiable given the malbehaviors and misconducts that they committed in history. But if you look at the well-written history and masterpiece by Mark Mazowa, for instance, a number of attempts to build global commons were led by those empires. The management of international rivers like Rhine and Donau were pushed by the United Kingdom, admittedly in their interest too. Anti-slavery trade was led by the United Kingdom, and it's easy to see their hypocrisy, as the United Kingdom was one of the first countries, doing that slavery trade, and yet changed the position first too. The precursors of International Postal Union or World Health Organization were established in the 19th century with British involvement. The creation of League of Nations would have been impossible without the British. Now, in the post-Second World War period, the United States led to the creation of United Nations, Bretton Woods institutions like GATT, IMF, and so on. All again are made in their interest too, but others benefited from those global institutions. On the contrary, if you look back at the interwar period, the United States, then already the world top economy, did not shoulder the political responsibility, which led to a sort of, the gap between supply and demand in maintaining, creating the global goods, which was a major source of instability too. Thus, I would like to stress the, growth, enrichment carry with it some responsibility. The point is, those efforts to create global commons need to be in the interest, in that interest of the creators, not only for the commons builder, but also of the others' interest too. If I may add, Japan also did its part. Post-war Japan contributed to developing Asian countries through ODA, as well as maintaining the global institutions like United Nations, IMF, and all others, and creating the regional institutions like Asian Development Bank. When Asia was hit by the financial crisis back in 1997, we tried to establish the Asian Monetary Fund, which was basically crushed by the United States, but that led to the Manila Framework, helping to secure the much-needed monetary liquidity and smooth circulation of capital at that time. Now, if you see the direction of United States and the subsequent appointment of cabinet members of the forthcoming Trump administration, you could easily imagine a sort of forthcoming hierarchy of victimhood. Gaza, Palestine comes at the top, Ukrainian comes second, with Iran perhaps as a third. NATO and the EU would be probably targeted. East Asia comes probably after these countries, but we cannot be relaxed as perhaps Indian colleagues, as the transactionalism of Mr. Trump may subject us to a deal at any moment. Apart from all these countries and people, we should not underestimate the further damage that the new U.S. administration is likely to inflict upon. We have to be cautious, sensitive about these risks. I would like to conclude my remarks by referring to our joint responsibility, Japan and India. Over the past decade or so, the Indo-Pacific has been made a major focus. A number of major powers set out their Indo-Pacific visions, strategies, and guidelines. It can be seen as a spectacular success of strategic communication. But in the face of possible world disorder, and given the rise of Asia, we are obliged to shoulder the responsibility to build and maintain the global and regional goods. It first has to serve our own strategic interest. Otherwise it won't be sustainable. Nobody does this as a pure altruism. Yet, for that to be common goods, it has to serve others too. And here we cannot be free from some normative considerations. Such ideas as rule of law or principle of peaceful dispute settlement, non-recourse to violence in settling disputes, are necessary for all the parties involved. But I remember once when I proposed in a dialogue with a Chinese MOFA Director General to mutually agree on the principle of peaceful settlement of dispute, not violent recourse, to settle those disputes in changing the status quo. He flatly refused, to my shock, saying that it would not be the Chinese interest to subscribe for that sort of principle. But I believe for us, Japan and India, that sort of rule and principle is important. Also, in the prospect of possible and even likely trade disruptions and perhaps continuous economic coercion, we need to uphold the principle of free trade and sustain the institutions serving that purpose. Here too, we can easily agree, and if so, we need to cooperate furthermore, upgrade our cooperation. Perhaps some previous speakers yesterday referred to, the CPTPP, or we could also do something on for the anti-coercive instrument. There are a number of concrete ideas. I believe Japan and India can agree to those rules and the principles as that would serve our strategic interest and should be in others' interest too. If so, we would jointly take a lead in securing common goods in the region and beyond. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Endo-Ken. And I now invite Ambassador Nalin Suri to make his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Asia and the Indo-Pacific are no doubt on the rise. India and Japan have an agreed strategic vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific that is inclusive, prosperous, and resilient. Developments in international relations in recent years have underlined that we need to provide greater substance to our strategic partnership. And our discussions yesterday suggest that there is today also a growing convergence of interests, including on international security issues and on the need for reform of global governance, institutions of global governance. India and Japan are also agreed on the need to sustain and nurture multipolarity in the Indo-Pacific, in the context of changing power balances in our region and the world. Having said that, we must bear in mind that the US remains a seriously consequential power in the Indo-Pacific excuse me, and in Asia, be it in economic, technological, or military terms. It is being seriously challenged by China, including in its relationship with and support for Taiwan. It is also pertinent to bear in mind that the shift in power balances from the Euro-Atlantic to the Indo-Pacific is a process that has been underway for almost 2 decades now. This does not, however, mean that the Indo-Pacific is going to replace the Euro-Atlantic. It means reflecting the changing reality and establishing a new balance. However, there is now a substantially new element that has arisen out of the serious changes in international relations and governance on account of the global financial crisis, COVID-19 pandemic, the Ukraine war, and the latest war by Israel against Hamas and Hezbollah. The impact of these developments and of rapid technological change is disruptive, and the direction of change at this stage is difficult to predict. What is predictable, though, is that those who wield power today are unlikely to yield it willingly or with any great ease. It is in this context that we need to address the outlook and need for greater strategic coordination between India and Japan. This was inherent in the outcome of the third 2+2 meeting between the defense and foreign ministers of India and Japan in Delhi last August, where both sides agreed to look at ways and means to further enhance bilateral security and defense cooperation. They also announced the intent to revise and update their 2008 Joint Declaration on Security Cooperation to reflect contemporary priorities and be responsive to contemporary security challenges facing our two countries. The challenge before our two countries now is to convert intent into practice. This will require us to take several steps. Let me suggest 8 of these steps. These are not, of course, comprehensive, and there can be other steps that can be added. First, I think we need to seriously strengthen the entire gamut of our bilateral trade, economic, people-to-people, and technological partnerships. Our discourse yesterday focused on precise ways in which this can and should be done. Second, we must strengthen the Quad and the evolving Indo-Pacific architecture. Third, we must enhance our bilateral security and defense cooperation, economic security, and strategic trade. Fourth, we must enhance our partnership in the G20. Fifth, India can, if Japan wishes, facilitate Japan's interactions with BRICS and the SCO. Sixth, we must work together to reform multilateral institutions to ensure they reflect contemporary reality and are based on the principles of non-discrimination, international law, and the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. The focus of reform must be the socio-economic development of the countries of the Global South. Seventh, strengthen multipolarity to complement multilateralism. And eighth, finally, we have a shared interest in restoring normalcy and democracy in Myanmar. Thank you.
Very much for those remarks. Could I now invite Professor Koga-Kai to make his
DPG and then the JIIA for inviting me to this public symposium, and also I'd like to thank the Ambassador Singh and Ambassador Sasai for the organizing this forum. So I'll just make the really quick 3 points with regard to the India, Japan, Indo-Pacific kind of views, and this is really important because as we know that the global order is now changing, and then we need to actually maintain the stability in order and also the strategic balance. And then in that sense, we also created and nurtured in the Pacific visions or strategy or concepts. And for that, we actually have the similarities and also the differences. And then for the visions, we actually could have some we could actually see the characteristics. And I'd like to highlight the 3 characteristics on that. The first one is both Japan and India highlights the importance of the engaging with the global South. Rise of Asia and also the rise of the West actually it's so visible, and then we are actually seeing the increasing importance of the global South in the shaping the regional and then also international order. And then to that end, India actually started to have the conference called the Voice of the Global South Summit from 2023, and then now they're having I think 3 or 4 the conferences so far. On the other hand, Japan actually emphasized the importance of Global South as illustrated by the Prime Minister Kishida's speech in the March 2023 in the new plan for the FOIP, Free and Open in the Pacific. And what he emphasized is that he emphasized the rules making through dialogue with the Global South. So we actually see the importance of Global South. Engaging Global South is a really important issue in maintaining the international order. And then second one is the importance of the regional institutions in the again like maintaining and enhancing rules-based international order. We talk a lot about the ASEAN, and then we talk a lot about the PIF, Pacific Island Forum, and as well as the IORA, Indian the Ocean Rim Association, to understand what is the important in those kind of sub-regions. And then they have been there before the Japan, India, the United States, Australia engaged in the Indo-Pacific. So in that sense, we have to kind of respect those regional institutions. And then this is actually what we have been doing. We have created the Quad, but at the same time, the Quad was not really sure what kind of the strategic objectives we are going to put forward. And then when Japan and India actually listen to the regional voices from those institutions, then they try to shape the feature of the Quad as well. For example, in the Quad, we emphasize the importance of the ASEAN centrality and unity, and also the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. That emphasized the importance of functional cooperation and then the socio-economic development, etc., etc. So in this sense, we really try to engage with the regional institutions in the Pacific, and then reflect their kind of needs and demands to our Indo-Pacific concept. And then the third one is despite these similarities, we actually have the different strategic perspectives, and then which was actually already mentioned in the previous speakers. But India emphasized the importance of the strategic autonomy, avoiding the establishment of the concrete alliance. But at the same time, if we look at Japan, Japan has the very close relations with the United States through the US-Japan alliance and the extensive and multi-layered communication channels with the United States. So obviously, we have the different kind of room to maneuver diplomatically and strategically, and then those differences sometimes are difficult to fill. But I think considering those 3 characteristics, I'm pretty optimistic about the future of the Japan-India cooperation in the Pacific, because to begin with, we have the willingness to communicate with each other continuously, and this actually creates the expansion of the area of cooperation between the 2 countries and beyond, as well as we are actually trying to narrow the gap that we have between the 2 countries. So again, I think this is really important. The characteristics for the Japan and then the India, the Indo-Pacific region, and then we should actually keep engaging with each other, bilaterally, and then as well as the trilaterally and the multilaterally, both the government level and also the social level, in order to take our responsibility to the maintaining the rules-based order in the future. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Professor Kogukai, for your remarks. May I now turn to Vice Admiral Anil Chopra, Distinguished Fellow DPG, for your remarks, please.
Thank you, Chair. The increasing weight of the Indo-Pacific in global security and economic dynamics is indeed indisputable. We all know the drivers which led to the formation of the Indo-Pacific around 2007. Almost 2 decades on, in 2024, all these factors have even greater salience, and so does the IP. The rise and power of China, the beginnings and intensifying of Great Power contestation, the consequent geostrategic imperative to include India as a counterbalance in the Asia-Pacific region, the shifting of the global economic center of gravity eastwards, the increasing importance of the IOR for trade and sea lines of communication, and for its energy resources, markets, and investment opportunities. There are, however, 3 other factors which now impact the Indo-Pacific and enhance its global footprint. Shrinking geography, the increasing significance of the continental dimension on what was an essentially maritime construct, and the major military build-up by middle powers in the region, Japan and India included. One cannot divorce the internal politics and onshore developments of the Indo-Pacific littoral states and view the Indo-Pacific purely in terms of the waters of the Indian Ocean and the Western Pacific. The Indo-Pacific surely affects Central Asia and even Europe and vice versa, though the Eurasian landmass, or the world island, as Alfred Mackinder termed it in the early 20th century, and it's no wonder that European powers like France, UK, and Germany are increasingly engaging and visible in the region. Geography, already shrunk by space-based communications and surveillance, is now easily spanned by the weaponry and the technologies of our times. And of course, we live in an era of hot peace, as has been mentioned. Everyone here is upping their naval and military capability, and this could lead and is leading to increasing brinkmanship and miscalculation. Now, due to the constraints of time, let me just apply a broad brush to the situation likely to obtain in the Indo-Pacific after the return of President Trump to the world stage. He has clearly articulated that he will not drag the US into military conflicts. What does this mean here? To my mind, that means that the US will address China by a significant increase in deterrence through increased build-up of US forces and capabilities in the Indo-Pacific to forestall any thoughts of an invasion of Taiwan or any hostilities with Japan or the ROK by China, much as Reagan did with Star Wars and the SDI with the Soviet Union. To do this, the US would have to bring the conflicts in Europe and West Asia to a quick resolution. Just an example of how the European situation can impact the Indo-Pacific. Any invasion of Taiwan is already fraught with grave political and military risk for China and Xi Jinping, and a strengthening of the US military posture and regional alliances would make a Taiwan adventure extremely unlikely unless undertaken in the next 2 months, which is bizarre. So if checkmated militarily and concurrently having to withstand 60% tariffs imposed on its exports by the US, what is China likely to do? I think reach out to Japan and India to start with, which it is already doing. And as Xi Jinping's utterances in APEC meeting in Peru indicate. We are therefore likely to see a China-Japan thaw, to use a mild word, as indeed happened in Trump 1. Such a détente could help China offset its concerns about North Korea and Russian pressure from the north. In effect, the situation in Northeast Asia is likely to stabilize a bit, but this will allow China to focus more on the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean region. Now, any rapprochement with China for both India and Japan must be handled with caution and eyes wide open, and I do believe that Japan and India could coordinate strategically on how to handle China's overtures. I'll conclude with a few words on the Indian Ocean region. We all know China is hugely dependent on the IOR for energy, if nothing else, but also for its manufacturing outflow. It's vulnerable. And the thing is that the Indian Ocean is a closed lake where ingress and egress in wartime or in conflict situations is very, very difficult. So while you can take in anything in peace and take out anything, it's not going to be the same ball game should there be a conflict. But this vulnerability of China is only a vulnerability if the Indian Navy has the requisite strength, force levels and capabilities. Now this is happening. The government recently gave clearance for nuclear attack submarine. But this is not happening as rapidly as it would have happened had we not been distracted continuously by China's shenanigans on the northern borders, which is part of its strategy. The Indian Navy, I'm happy to relate, is okay and great form with mission deployments and active engagement in Quad, Malabar, Eons, Milans, etc. I agree, Quad needs to continue, but I would like to say Quad should be able to factor in more military activity without the commitments and entanglements of a military alliance. This is happening. We have signed AXA with Japan and other foundational agreements with our Quad partners. With Japan specifically, we could continue to improve interoperability, and of course we look forward to co-development and co-production in India's defense industry base. Thank you.
Our final panelist is Dr. Kyoto Tomoko. You have the floor.
Thank you so much for DPG's and JIIR's invitation and hospitality. Since other speakers already covered the wider strategic environment in the Indo-Pacific, I'd like to stick to the India-Japan bilateral relations in security and defense domain, special focus on the revision of the joint declaration on security cooperation between Japan and India, which was signed in 2008, and the two countries have agreed to upgrade it during the 2+2 meeting in August this year. So we had already discussed the issue yesterday. I don't want to repeat the same thing, but I tried to add something to what I have said yesterday. So the joint declaration on security cooperation between Japan and India was quite a breakthrough for Japan, which had long limited to its security cooperation with the United States and its allies after the war, when it was signed. At the same time, that time, Japan had been engaged in operations in the Indian Ocean since after the 9/11 terrorist attacks in the US in 2001, and operations in Iraq were also underway. And India was also becoming a major power through economic reforms and was beginning to focus on its navy and maritime security. When the joint declaration was issued in 2008, I was in Delhi working for the think tank IPCS. I was very surprised when I learned what the declaration said. So I can't explain everything, but if you take a look at the mechanism of cooperation, cooperation will be conducted between the two defense authorities by way of various ways, such as meeting between the defense ministers or vice ministers of defense of Japan and the defense secretary of India, or military to military talks, exchanges of service chiefs, Navy-to-Navy staff talks, service-to-service exchanges, including bilateral and multilateral exercise. So I was so surprised to see the inclusion of cooperation at the field level between the militaries, not only just political cooperation. I honestly wondered whether the SDF would go this far in defense cooperation with India. But actually they did. They achieved most of these things and more than that. That's why we need to upgrade this joint declaration. So as you see, of course, we have a lot of regular high visit, and then my Navy to Navy's cooperation and armed forces, ground self-defense forces, and Japan Air Defense Self-Defense Forces, and Indian Air Forces. There are lots of things going on, like Via Guardian in 2023. As you've heard, the two countries have just agreed to transfer of the Unicorn, Unified Complex Radio Antenna for Naval Ships. And I worked in the Embassy of Japan in India before, so I know how hard it was for defense attaches and diplomats in the embassy. I believe dealing with Indian counterparts are not so easy. So I really proud of them. But at the same time, we must not forget that without the political push, cooperation would not have progressed as far as it has. Changes in the strategic environment have reshaped the way both Japan and India view each other. For the Japanese policymakers, the security environment in the East Asia, including the South China Sea, is tougher and tougher every year. Especially during the 2000s and early 2010, the US was also busy with the war in Afghanistan and the Middle East. It is very natural that they tried to find other security partners, and they discovered India. Since we share the mutual opponents, China, as well as other strategic thinking, like Koga-sensei mentioned earlier. But the thing is that they have missed what they missed. The fact that first, India doesn't ally. Second, India balance, and third, India doesn't trust the United States. So as I said earlier, I don't remember how many times I was told my Indian friends that Japan should be more independent from the US, so that India-Japan can cooperate more. But for Japan, we need more security partners to supplement the alliance. We need the US and more than that. So we want to involve India with trilateral or quadrilateral architectures more than bilateral. But India has a lot bitter memories with the US and wants to maintain strategic autonomy. That is why I always insist that Japan should cooperate with India more bilateral manner, which could be more manageable or push forward than the quad or trilateral. Having said that, this Japan-India bilateral relations, as well as the quad or tri, have achieved so many things in the past, as I mentioned. But at the same time, in my view, the bilateral security cooperation is now facing the very difficult question: what's next? Can we do more from now? The reality is most of the security cooperation are still like a symbolic manner. We need more than that. In both countries, I think politics lead security cooperation, and the militaries in both countries cannot do more than what the government doesn't want. The Indian government prioritized strategic autonomy and was hesitant to show anything that gives the impression that India is now aligned with one side, while the Japanese government has the constitutional regulations. In addition, compared to the late former Prime Minister Abe, who was a strong driver of the bilateral relations, who passed away, I'm not sure who could lead this security cooperation in Japanese politics. We need more strong relationship who is fully aware of Indian importance and who can deal with Indian counterparts. I really, really hope that our new Prime Minister, Ishiba, will lead this good trend, more deeper cooperation, more than symbolic one. And I guess the American new president, Mr. Trump, will demand more from Japan in the security domain, which could be good for the India-Japan relations in a way. As Japan expands what it can do in security, the SDF should be able to increasingly step into specific cooperation with India more. Moreover, I'm hoping that technological cooperation in defense and strategic domain will help to strengthen the bilateral ties more. So I really look forward to reading a new joint declaration soon and seeing deeper security cooperation between two countries. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Kyoto, and also for pointing out some of the gaps which you perceive may be existing in our respective positions and in our thinking. As I had pointed out yesterday, our relations with Japan have been growing for the last 2 decades and have made progress. India's relations with the United States have also been growing over the last 2 decades, but have made even faster progress. So this question of the gap in trust and understanding and relationships based on trust, I think, is not so relevant at the moment. It may have been there at some distant past, but there has been such tremendous effort on both the part of Japan and of the United States to engage India, and India has very warmly reciprocated those overtures and has progressed both these relationships. I think there are some questions which I'm sure that the participants would like to raise, and some questions which Ken you might want to raise. But let me start this segment of the discussion, which is going to be more interactive, with 1 or 2 questions of my own, based on what we have heard from the panelists. The first is that there is this talk, and it's always been there, which is the question of alliance and strategic autonomy, and whether this is a limiting factor or it's not a limiting factor. And the fact is that we already have an example of the post-alliance relationship in the Quad, and it therefore occurs to me that is this a serious impediment, which, along with Japan's constitutional of the faster progress in defense relations? I say this because I noticed that while security, economic, technological, other areas of cooperation are very frequently mentioned in interactions with Japan by the Japanese colleagues, defense is really the one which is somewhat on some kind of a caveat, because it's largely limited to Japan's alliances, which is mainly the alliances with the United States, and secondarily with those countries which are allied with the United States, which is in the region, Australia, Philippines, etc. So is this really going to become a limiting factor? That's the question to the colleagues from Japan, especially because delaying progress of the special strategic and global partnership based on such considerations will make it less effective, and that will make it less possible for us to achieve mutually beneficial goals in maintaining peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific. That's one part of the question. Second question, which I would, since I will then turn to Ken, for the next round of questions. That pertains to what we may do together to buttress peace, stability, security, prosperity in the broader Indo-Pacific, focusing on our ties with countries in the region. So we are both actively engaged in Southeast Asia. We are engaged, India is also engaged in the Indian Ocean. Japan is in East Asia. We are working in our own ways to build regional capacity. This is receiving greater attention from both sides. What are the real prospects of greater synergy between India and Japan in building these regional capacities? Are we going to be progressing from talking about these issues to actually coordinating policies and outcomes through our diplomatic engagement, through our engagement on security, through our engagement on SLOC security, for example? So these questions do arise because I think they need to be addressed so that we can have a better understanding of where the limitations may lie, because we don't have, the time is not on our side. The situation in the region and the world is severe. Both our countries recognize that, and this is quite evident. So to be able to progress matters, I think we need to be able to progress matters on the basis which is taking greater cognizance of the fact that we are in a post-alliance world in terms of the growing multipolarity of Asia, and we need to act accordingly. So I will turn now to Japanese colleagues, whoever wishes to answer this. Let me start with Professor Endo Ken. Would you like to say something?
Oh, thank you very much indeed for Ambassador Sin. Well, in some of the areas you might know better than I do, and I limit myself to maybe somewhat general, and then ask my colleagues to add on it. About the constitutional impediment to sort of upgrade our cooperation, we have introduced some legal instruments enable us to export defense equipments. But you're right in pointing out some, the constitutional and the policy, sort of constraints upon us. And plus, if you see the state of party politics in Japan, the LDP, is in coalition with the Komeito party. The latter, who is more cautious about this sort of, defense cooperation. So, and that alliance, so the party alliance, is unlikely to go away for some time to come. So you could reasonably expect some constraints, but it's not as strong as before. Now, the second, what needs to be done to to make concrete our sort of regional cooperation in the Pacific? I would say two things. One, geographically. As we talk over some time, in the dinner table or on fringe, Indonesia is one target. I think that country would grow for sure over the next decades or so into a sort of regional superpower. If we imagine the G7 in the year of 2040. I think Indonesia might well be qualified. I think, and I also believe that your country has some, has developed some ties with this the forthcoming, regional superpower. So I think, given the tie that we have between you and us, we could perhaps trilateralize this sort of, good relations. And second, in terms of functions, a number of areas we could deepen our cooperation. One mentioned about economic security, diversification of those, resources. Cyber and space. I don't know about the defense equipment, but there are fertile grounds on which we could deepen functionally our cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks in response to my questions. But any further remarks, Professor Kogakai?
Just quickly, thank you for your question. So what I actually want to do here is if the alliance to answer if the alliance is going to be the limiting factor in the facilitating cooperation between Japan and India. To some extent, maybe like there are certain constraints, but it's not necessarily coming from the alliance. Japan has also the several constraints, such as the constitutional constraints and also the legal constraints in terms of its defense cooperation with the foreign countries. So there is, but then I don't think there are substantial limitations in terms of the cooperation in other areas. As you mentioned, Quad has the number of the cooperative areas that they are actually trying to facilitate, including the cyber, education, infrastructure, the space, and also counterterrorism, HADR, etc., etc. So, in that sense, I think these are the areas that we can actually focus on for now, and then facilitate cooperation between India and then Japan.
I guess if there is any limitation from Japanese side, I think this could be more like a mental or psychological break, maybe. And as I said earlier, the chemistry between Japan and India, sometimes good, but sometimes bad, especially like negotiation styles, communications skills, especially this how to communicate each other is totally different. And then most of the Japanese people in Tokyo don't know how Indian, people are thinking. I mentioned, earlier yesterday, but so sometimes it took long time to understand each other, even the security field. So I think this one we have to try to remove it in the future. Thank you.
Just one small follow-up, since you are an expert on defense issues, because there was a reference made earlier by one of the panelists to the overseas security assistance, ODA, and then also OSA, which is a new factor in Japan's diplomatic toolkit, and extending that OSA in a meaningful manner towards the nations of the Indo-Pacific, which in particular would mean many of the countries in Southeast Asia. Would there be limitations or constitutional and other limitations to that? Because this is not going to be something which will work in small token amounts. Japan has the capacity and the capability to be a very major provider of such regional security public goods in Southeast Asia. So will that progress faster?
Thank you very much. So with regard to the OSA, offshore security assistance, I think the Japan has the particular reputation to. I mean, they don't actually provide the offensive capabilities to those countries, and then they are trying to enhance the other military capabilities, defensive military capabilities, including the radar and also the ships. So in that sense, yes, there are limitations. But then I think this is the posture that is welcomed by the Southeast Asian countries as well, because it doesn't actually have the image of the provoking the particular countries in the East Asia. And then now the OSA is provided to the Vietnam, the Philippines, the Malaysia, and also Fiji, Zimbabwe, and I think they were thinking about Indonesia as well. I think they have already sent some, but I'm not sure about. But there are many the Southeast Asian countries who actually accepted OSA. So in that sense, that's a good sign, and then it's actually what I consider it's the strategic empowerment. They are not actually asking Southeast Asia to act or behave in a particular way by giving the particular defense capabilities also. They are just kind of providing the capabilities to the Southeast Asian countries so that they could be more kind of autonomous, and then they will not actually get influenced or coercively by the particular major powers and so on and so forth. So I think in that sense, the Japan's OSA is pretty the important in contributing the stability in the Pacific.
Thank you very much. Ken, I'll hand it over to you, but as I'm handing it over to you, I will also just mention that it would be of interest to the participants as well as to the regional audience. One, how does this new Ishiba administration progress its policies of engagement and security engagement with its allies, with its alliances like the United States, and with those who are not allies, who are strategic partners like us? There's been a lot of talk about it. That's why I thought
Thank you, Rahman. Before talking on what's likely that the Ishiba administration would do on this defense and regional security issues, coming back to your first questions about India pursuing this strategic, independent autonomy policy, and Japan, based upon the alliance system, try to expand the perimeter of defense cooperation with other countries, not necessarily in alliance network of the sort. My conclusion is that this would not be impediment. This is more mutually reinforcing standing. I would say this because, in terms of peace and stability in the region, possibly beyond the region, we have common sort of objective of the thought that include at the end we need to have a strategic stability among U.S., China, and also Russia. I would say it is critical, and how you would do it, I think we could do together on some area. We could do it independently. For example, when it comes to how we would galvanize the cooperation from Global South, I believe the country like India could play a great role, and together with us. And we have ODA instruments, more than possibly you do have in terms of the history of our assistance program, not only to Asia, but beyond Asia, Africa, Middle East, whatever the places we have been doing. Of course, India continues to be a best recipient of our official development assistance. That's because we think that India is an important partner of this. And also, when we see your link or some of the relationship you have developed with country like Russia. Say, that would help. Because we have a pretty difficult relationship with Russia, whether not only us, but Europe and the United States, of course. But when you have basically, relationship with Russia you have developed would help when we need Russia coming back to eventually to the framework of strategic stability around the region. And also, for example, when you continue to play a major role in Indian Ocean stability of the sort, you have to deal with not only, China, but also some other countries around you. And in doing so, we could benefit, from what you do. And likewise, if we continue to develop on diplomatic, economic, and security engagement, and not to limit it to official security assistance. These things would help you in many ways. And finally, in terms of strategic challenge coming from China, I think, we have more common interest, say, how to deal with Chinese expansion on the maritime domain, and beyond it, all this land policy of China around Europe. So I'm saying this, that all this put together, and this constitution limit is not actual limit. It's not simply applied to India. Somebody said it. It applied to all of the countries around it, including the United States. So, but eventually, my guess is that all this constitutional debate in Japan, taking more than a decade, whatever, will be subject to change. As we see more of the international security role to be developed in the years. This is a necessity, and not necessarily, think that the current status quo is not the status quo in the next decade. So our national security policy is evolving, developing, and so for that, in that context, our partnership with India in the security dimension will be evolving, I would say, and possibly develop more. And so what I'm saying is that, of course, we have limit of what we can do. And you have also your own limit, what you can do. But I think each side has its own values, to give a service to each other for the sake of each own national interest. So I think there could be more convergence of national interest in dealing with the, emerging strategic challenges, which is common to us. I just wanted to say it.
Yeah, something on the issue about government? Yeah, my sense is that he would continue to ride on the security framework developed by the previous government, including Prime Minister Abe, Suga, and Kishida, and even if you look at our alliance and relationship with the United States, whether it was Obama, then Trump and Biden, all this free and open Indo-Pacific has been developed without Trump, so I would say it. And there is bipartisan support, I would say, on the U.S.-Japan alliance, and also this free and open Indo-Pacific. And somebody is worried about a possible change of a Trump administration, that he might not be necessarily so keen about this one. But I doubt it. If you read and listen to all the discussion taking place among the conservative, I would say, policy makers around Trump, some of them are extreme, but on the whole, I think they support the idea of free and open in the Pacific. So I don't have any sort of concern much
by the, I would say, Mr. Trump's unpredictability when it comes to free and open Pacific policy. So with that, I think challenge is more on how we could, for example, on the defense and alliance network, could we deepen the nature of alliance with the United States? Could we widen our own alliance system? And widen means that in the traditional sense of alliance, it's more of a I would say, alliance system. Like, we do have a wider relationship with, say, a country like Philippines now. We didn't do that before. We don't call that our alliance, but they're in a friendly category to cope with the challenges coming from our neighbors. That could be also applied to a country like Vietnam and some ASEAN countries, not to mention countries like Australia or Canada, or even some of the European friends. And we don't call our relationship with this country alliance, but they are pretty close to de facto sort of operative partnership, looking like more like alliance, but not necessarily purely traditional sense of alliance. So for that, we'd like to see more of the relationship with India coming to that category without harming Indians, policy of the independence and the neutrality. I think without harming or jeopardizing your own basic policy, I think we could do more.
So thank you, Ken, for responding some of those important questions, and I take particular heart at what you are saying, because you were very much involved in the crafting of the national security strategy, which is currently extant in Japan, and your description that this is a dynamic situation which is evolving, and the situation as far as security cooperation with India will similarly continue to evolve in a positive direction. That's a very valuable and important input, and also this broader convergence that there need not be impediments to the fact that we have common challenges and common objectives to pursue for mutual benefit across the Indo-Pacific. So can we turn to colleagues on the Indian side?
You want me to moderate?
Yes, to do the final part of it. I think we have got exactly about 10 minutes more left for this session.
Well, why don't we go to the Indian participants? Please.
You okay?
Yeah.
All right. Sir, would you like to, Ambassador Sibyl, sir, would you like to make any remarks, any further remarks on what you've heard and what has been mentioned by our Japanese colleagues?
Well, I think when it comes to India-Japan ties, I feel that India is more open to expand, deepen, develop those ties, and this has been true for a long time. But from the Japanese side, there has been not the same degree of response for various reasons. Japan has its own limitations and compulsions, deriving essentially from its constitution. So to expect Japan to make our defense cooperation measure up to the kind of things that we are doing with the United States would be expecting too much. It will be a slow process, as has come out from our discussions. However, quite apart from defense platforms and other nature of defense cooperation, there are lots of other things which can be done, which can indirectly build up India's overall capacities and capabilities, which will then have a fallout even on our defense capabilities. And here is the entire question of technological cooperation. There should essentially be no inhibition or bar because of the Constitution to engage in deeper tech cooperation. As it is even within Quad, there is a pillar that deals with critical and emerging technologies. With the United States, we have gone ahead very far where the national security advisors on both sides are chaperoning this process. Japan can easily, without constitutional inhibition, if it so desires, work closely with us. It has a lot of, it is and has been a great technological power in so many areas, electronics and especially. And this is an area in which we have deep interest. Now, if the trade volume increases, which means that the interaction between India and Japan becomes much broader in scope, and that in itself then has a fallout in terms of building up India's economic capabilities, which in turn opens up more room for us to build up our defense capability. What I mean is that these things have linkages always. We talked about the cyber, and Japan is interested in cooperating with us in on the cyber side. This has become a big challenge, and with the artificial intelligence and everything else now becoming a huge problem for the world, this will increase. And the digitalization of everything. This is an area in which we can cooperate. What surprises me is that I'm not an expert, not studied why there is this problem, but on the information technology side, where India has great strength, where the United States is leveraging our capabilities and in fact exploiting us. There's a real drain of brain drain, but in various ways. But in this sector, as we heard yesterday, there's hardly any cooperation with Japan. So that doesn't really make any sense. It's not very clear why there should be this kind of an inhibition on the Japanese side. If they look at India and look at India's strengths, which can be leveraged by them for building up their own strengths in an increasingly digitalized world, why would they not want to do it? Look at the global capability centers that Western corporations have built in India, about 1,700. I was reading in the Economic Times that the projection is that next year it may go up to 2,700. I met with some heads of US corporations, and when they give me figures of the numbers they employ, it is something that we don't know, we don't talk about. So why can't Japan also set up a global capabilities center in India? That also will be mutually beneficial. When it comes to, there's always a feeling on our side that, although this is changing, that Japan's geographical or geopolitical vision essentially in the past stopped at Myanmar. With India, yes, there is a big change, and there are prospects for big change, and it's a good thing. But still, I think the Japanese geopolitical outlook remains confined largely to that region for whatever reasons, cultural reasons or whatever. Now, to my mind, if China is a threat, if China threat has to be countered, it has to be first countered in Asia. And you cannot counter it in Asia without India. There is no way you can do it. The other countries are too small. They don't have the same kind of strategic autonomy that India has. And India's size and its resources and its future economic growth, which will release even more funds for our defense. If we continue to grow as we are doing, our defense budget will increase exponentially. And we have a long, we are going to be in difficulty with China for the foreseeable future. China's mindset, its worldview, its concept of what it sees as its own role, its hierarchical thinking, is such that the only impediment, obstacle to what it seeks in terms of its global role is India. First they have to dominate Asia before they begin to dominate the rest of the world. So Japan would have, to my mind, an obvious interest in a longer term sense to find all possible ways to strengthen ties with India in that perspective. Fortunately, Japan has always actually aligned its policies towards India with that of the United States in particular. But now with the kind of relationship we have built with the United States, that kind of inhibition or restraint or constraint should no longer be there. So in parallel, as we develop our ties with the United States in various fields, there should be logically a possibility of doing that in the India-Japan relationship. So this is, again, looking from the outside, this would seem commonsensical. But on ground, this doesn't seem to be happening to the extent that we would want. We've tried to cooperate in our neighborhood. In Sri Lanka we tried, but it didn't sort of succeed the way we expected. In Bangladesh, now things have changed very radically. As was mentioned by Nalin, we should be able to coordinate to stabilize and find some solution to what is happening in Myanmar, because that's directly linked with what was earlier discussed, what the role that Japan is playing, which is very important to link our northeast with ASEAN or build those corridors of various kinds. But that is now blocked. It was earlier blocked by what happened in Myanmar and made worse by what had happened in Bangladesh. There was an attempt to cooperate in Africa, but that didn't go anywhere. Now the big issue is that China, when it comes to connectivity and other things, it takes its own decisions. It doesn't have to coordinate, cooperate with anyone, find partnerships on this and that. But when Japan has this project of, I forget what it is termed as, but connectivity projects which are more viable and economically justifiable and high quality infrastructure and all that, they don't have the capacity to do that on their own, unlike China. They have to team up with other partners. With India, there could be potentially some teaming up, but as I understand, in Africa, it hasn't really succeeded. At the end of the day, the Japanese private sector has to engage our private sector in India far more intensively than I think is the case. Because at the moment, because of the ODA and other things, they get a lot of economic opportunities riding on the back of government assistance. But my information may be outdated. You are the people who deal with this issue day by day. But nevertheless, this is a problem. Unlike in the case of, this is a problem we have with Russia too, that the Russian private sector also wants to ride on the back of government-to-government agreements and the openings that are created in that area. The Americans' private sector is far, 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 far more dynamic and is willing to invest, take risks, etc., etc. So there it is. I think one can end by saying that we should not have any excessive aspirations or expectations, and we should make incremental progress, which we are doing. There will never be the kind of alignment in our thinking because of the different nature of our relationships with the United States. Japan's dependence on the United States is critical. It's critical for them. Our dependence on the United States is important to us, but it's not critical. So we have more options in dealing with the foreign policy, security issues than Japan has. And I think Japan should leverage us much more than they are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Sybil, very much for that. And Nalin, would you like to make some final remarks? And then Admiral?
I think I'd just like to repeat what I've said yesterday and today. I think this is a relationship which is far, far below potential and opportunity. I think we all mean well. I think there are limitations perhaps on both sides. But I think unless we break through those limitations, this relationship will never really develop in its full potential. And I think the China factor is extremely important. We need to bear that in mind. I don't think we have a substantive enough dialogue between our two countries on China. I think we should begin to have that, so that any misinformation each side may have about the other's relationships or partnerships with China can be clarified. Because we can't just keep pretending that there is no China problem. So, in a forum like this, I think it's important to accept the reality of that. I don't think we do enough of that. We've invested a lot in this relationship. We have made incremental progress in several areas of work. And even on the defense and security side, I don't think the Japanese constitution, from my perspective, is a limitation at all. We're not asking Japan to fight for India. So I think the point is, if you need to structure your defense collaboration and your critical and emerging technologies collaboration in a manner that both countries can benefit, I think there can be much more transfer of so-called dual-use technology from Japan to India. I don't think there's been any of such transfer as far as I'm aware. But I can only, I'm thinking I'm going on like a broken record, and I've been doing this for many years. I think this is a relationship which is far, far below opportunity and potential. It's not enough to have senior political leaders say that we must do this together and we are all on the same page. It's not enough. I gave you statistics yesterday on trade, on investment, on people-to-people relations. I think for the two most important democracies, the third and fifth largest economy, the fourth and fifth largest economy in the world, it's a highly understated figure. We perhaps do more with our neighbors than we do with Japan in many of these areas. So I think it's important for us to be honest with each other and be very clear where we want to go. The fact that we've been having this dialogue for so many years suggests that we want to move forward, but I don't think we've identified the impediments. And I don't want to end on a negative note, but I think we need to identify the impediments and overcome those impediments, because it will be to our mutual benefit. I think it will be to the benefit of Asia. And if there's going to be any new power balancing in Asia, just as India cannot be ignored, I think India will need Japan to do that power balancing. We keep talking about ASEAN centrality. Let's all be honest. What has ASEAN achieved? Seriously, apart from providing a forum, ASEAN's own integration is not yet of the nature that you would have imagined or should have happened. It is not even halfway as close as purely on the trade side as the European Union is, for instance. So what is this centrality that we are talking about? Simply that they are geographically central in Asia? Or they provide a forum where everybody is willing to come and talk about security issues? I don't know. Let me stop at that, because I don't want to go on beyond the point of this.
I just have a brief comment underscoring the fundamentals of Japanese interest in this whole business of the Indo-Pacific and of India. And that is, as we all know, Japan is dependent also critically on the Indian Ocean for energy, for investment, for markets, for resource. And that's the beginning of where the Japan-India sort of relationship took a leap in the early 21st century. Now, an alliance, as everyone knows, makes it incumbent on people to then get themselves involved militarily should there be an attack on one. And both India and Japan are wary of that particular commitment and incumbency. And so partnership has progressed militarily, but like everyone has underscored, not to the limits that it could have taken. My suggestion to our Japanese interlocutors is Japan is definitely interested in the stability of the Indian Ocean region, stability of your trade, of your energy, just as China is. And that stability is dependent on a very large degree of Indian naval and military capabilities in this region. So everything else apart, it does make sense for Japan to do what it can to increase this capability by, as has been suggested, increasing involvement in the Indian Defence Industrial Base and in co-development and co-production, which would help capabilities of India in the Indian Ocean region, and which therefore benefits Japan in a broader way than any sort of military alliance. And having said that, and as pointed out by one of our Japanese friends, there has been an increasing number of defense engagements, and they will continue despite language difficulties. We have progressed a lot, and but that is not where it should stop. And therefore I have underscored this business of getting invested in India's defense industrial base to the degree possible. Thank you.
Just a short point about India not trusting the U.S. The history of India-U.S. relations is such that there have been good reasons for India to have deep distrust of the United States in the past. The country that has damaged India's strategic interests the most is the United States of America. All these, technology, all these, the sanctions that they imposed on us over the years, and all these groups that were set up to deny transfers of technology in various areas were actually set up initially with India in view in order to deny us access to those technologies. But all this changed after our nuclear deal with the United States, and since then there has been great progress in our relations. The underlying trust is for for 3-4 reasons. One, that we are in fundamental disagreement with the manner in which United States uses sanctions, because they affect us. Our relationship with Iran has been virtually destroyed because of the U.S. sanctions. We've had problems in dealing with Russia over the Ukraine crisis. We earlier had CAATSA. Fortunately, it has not been used against us, but nevertheless, it is there. It's kind of a Damocles sword. And then United States continues even now to interfere in our internal affairs. So its regional policies, even after we developed our ties with the United States following the nuclear deal, have not been always helpful, with Afghanistan in particular, but including with Pakistan. On the economic side, we've had difficulties with the United States under Trump. So there is a reason why there is, alongside our willingness and our openness and our desire to build very strong ties, and it's happening on the ground, there are reasons for us to be watchful and careful, though we, as a mature country, balance it out and not allow these important irritants in our relationship to actually guide our overall relationship with the United States. If 80% our relationship with the United States today is positive and 20% is negative, then we have to sort of put aside that 20% and tolerate it and swallow it and keep on going ahead with that. With Japan, I think in the past they have also been guided a great deal by the quality of India-US relationship. And as our relationship with the United States began to improve, Japan has also been opening itself up to more. The important thing is that even though Japan has always worked in tandem with the United States, look at the pressure Japan put us on non-proliferation issues. But there has never been distrust of Japan. There's never been distrust of Japan. And we've always wanted good relations with Japan. We understood their compulsions. We might have been irritated here and there, but the overall thinking and posture and sentiment has always been positive towards Japan. So I think I thought.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Ken, would you like to make a final response, and then we can wrap up the session?
Thank you very much. The point our Indian friends raised in this open forum is very beneficial, not only to us, but also to the wider audience in terms of recognizing converging strategic interests of both countries, especially the India's interest and position when it has to work as a kind of counterbalancing power in the region. On that, I think we have a common interest one way or another. I think the issue is more on how do we support to increase the capacity of India, including its defense technology and so forth. And I think the issue is well recognized. And possibly what we should do is to step up the speed of this process, and in a way to jump from the traditional sort of restrictions we have placed for some years. I think this is beginning to happen now. And listen to what your Deputy Security Advisor, introduced today. And there is all positive sign there. So I'm not that pessimistic on the point. And even on non-proliferation issues you just mentioned, I think, of course, we have a unique history of that. You recognize it. Why we work against your nuclear development. There was a history, and we continue to go and follow that history when we propose, to the United Nations on the resolution for a non-nuclear world. And it's kind of like your histories of non-allied history. That's our own history. So we need to mutually understand on the point. But even with those elements, I think we continue to work on the right balance, as you said, between the realities on the ground and what we need to come to terms on the strategic challenges that we share together. So with that, I just want to thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ken, for those remarks. And to conclude this panel discussion and this public session of the 7th India-Japan Indo-Pacific Forum, 10th India-Japan Track 1.5 Dialogue, let me just say that if our primary purpose is to be the premier forum for strategic cooperation, for strategic communication between India and Japan, I think this session has lived up to that ask, and we have discussed a huge range of issues over the last day and a half, and I think we have a much better. We are living in a changed world where the circumstances are changing minute by minute as we speak. It is a turbulent world. It is a world of disruption and conflict and transition. But we have a better idea today and now of each other's geostrategic positioning than we had a day and a half ago. And we also have a better common understanding of the convergences which we have in the Indo-Pacific and the contributions which we need to make to the region to ensure its stability, security, and prosperity. And we have also identified some areas in the bilateral relationship which require particular attention as we go forward, including economic security, our technological exchanges, and our people-to-people relations. And it's a good sign that we have important meetings forthcoming at the Track 1 level on technology. We have a upgraded joint declaration on security cooperation on the cards. We have a forthcoming bilateral summit between India and Japan, and also we have on a broader regional platform a forthcoming Quad summit to look forward to. So with that, let me say that I'd like to thank all our friends from Japan who have come. Thank you, Ken, for bringing such a great delegation to Delhi. Thank my colleagues from the Delhi Policy Group and from the strategic community in Delhi for joining us. Thank my colleagues from the Ministry of External Affairs for being such strong partners for the Delhi Policy Group's dialogue with Japan. And we hope to see you soon. Safe travels back to Japan. We conclude this public session now. Thank you.